Quranism describes any form of Islam that accepts the Quran as revelation, but rejects the religious authority and/or authenticity of the Hadith collections. Quranists follow the Quran alone. They believe that its message is clear and complete, and that it can therefore be fully understood without referencing the Hadith. They claim that the Hadith literature was forged, as it had been written 250 years after the death of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. There are significant differences between Quranists in their interpretation of Islam. Quranism is similar to movements in other religions such as the Karaite movement of Judaism and the sola scriptura view of Protestant Christianity. Hadith rejection has also been associated with Muslim modernists. Terminology. Adherents of Quranism are referred to as Quranists, or people of the Quran. This should not be confused with Quran, which is an organization formed by Abdullah Chakralawi. Quranists may also refer to themselves simply as Muslims, submitters, or reformists. Doctrine. The extent to which Quranists reject the authenticity of the Sunnah varies, but the more established groups have thoroughly criticized the authenticity of the Hadith and refused it for many reasons, the most prevalent being the Quranist claim that Hadith is not mentioned in the Quran as a source of Islamic theology and practice, was not recorded in written form until more than 2 centuries after the death of Muhammad, and contain perceived internal errors and contradictions. History. Quranists believe, based on numerous historical accounts, that the Quranist sentiment dates back to the time of Muhammad. During the Abbasid Caliphate, the poet, theologian, and jurist, Ibrahim an-Nazm founded a madhab called the Nazmiya that rejected the authority of hadiths and relied on the Quran alone. His famous student, al-Jahiz, was also critical of those who followed hadith, referring to his traditionalist opponents as al-Nabita. A contemporary of an-Nazm, al-Shafi'i, tried to refute the arguments of the Quranists and established the authority of hadiths in his book Kitab Jamal Ilm, and Ibn Qutaybah tried to refute an-Nazm's arguments against hadith in his book Tawil Mukhtalaf al-Hadith. In South Asia during the 19th century, the Al-Quran movement formed partially in reaction to the Al-Hadith, whom they considered to be placing too much emphasis on hadith. Many Al-Quran adherents were formerly adherents of Al-Hadith but found themselves incapable of accepting certain hadiths. In Egypt during the early 20th century, the ideas of Quranists like Muhammad Tawfiq Siddiqui grew out of Salafism, i.e. a rejection of taqlid. Following, as many Quranists have a very individualistic interpretation of the Quran, rejecting sectarianism and organized religion as a general rule. It is difficult to gather an accurate estimate of the number of Quranists in the world today by doing a study of the Quranist organizations that exist. Another difficulty in determining the prevalence is the possible fear of persecution due to being regarded as apostates and therefore deserving of the death penalty by many traditional scholars like Yusuf al-Badri. Organizations and branches. Al-Quran. Al-Quran is an organization formed by Abdullah Chakralawi, who described the Quran as Ahsan Hadith, meaning most perfect hadith, and consequently claimed it does not need any addition. His movement relies entirely on the chapters and verses of the Quran. Chakralawi's position was that the Quran itself was the most perfect source of tradition and could be exclusively followed. According to Chakralawi, Muhammad could receive only one form of revelation, and that was the Quran. He argues that the Quran was the only record of divine wisdom, the only source of Muhammad's teachings, and that it superseded the entire corpus of hadith, which came later. Al-Quran scholars may use tafsir sincere when pursuing the interpretations of the Quran. Submitters in the United States. It was associated with Rashad Khalifa, founder of the United Submitters International. The group popularized the phrase "the Quran," the whole Quran, and nothing but the Quran. After Khalifa declared himself the messenger of the covenant, he was rejected by other Muslim scholars as an apostate of Islam. Later, he was assassinated in 1990 by a terrorist group. His followers believe that there is a mathematical structure in the Quran, based on the number 19. A group of submitters in Nigeria was popularized by High Court Judge Isa Othman. Kalokato is a Quranistic movement in northern Nigeria. They are sometimes mistaken for an unrelated militant group founded by Muhammadu Marwa called Jantatsin. One of the most well-known Quranist leaders in Nigeria is an Islamic scholar Malam Isayaka Salisu. Persecution. In 2015, 27 Quranists were arrested in Sudan after reportedly making the religious beliefs public. Notable Quranists: Ahmed Subhi Mansour, an Egyptian-American Islamic scholar. He founded a small group of Quranists, but was exiled from Egypt and is now living in the United States as a political refugee. Chekanur Maulavi, a progressive Islamic cleric who lived in Edapal in Malappuram district of Kerala, India. He was noted for his controversial and unconventional interpretation of Islam based on Quran alone. He disappeared on the 29th of July 1993 under mysterious circumstances and is now widely believed to be dead. Edip Yüksel, a Kurdish-American philosopher, lawyer, Quranist advocate, author of 19, God's Signature in Nature and Scripture, Manifesto for Islamic Reform and a co-author of Quran, a reformist translation, currently teaches philosophy and logic at Pima Community College and medical ethics and criminal law courses at Brown Mackie College. Ibrahim Nazim, an Afro-Iraqi philosopher, theologian, jurist, historian and poet who founded a madhab called Nazimiyya. He was a nephew of the Mutazilite theologian Abu al-Hudhayl al-Awlaf. One of his students was Al-Jahiz. Yazanuri Ozturk was a Turkish theologian, Quranist Muslim, lawyer, columnist and a former member of Turkish parliament. Nazir Subhani, an Iranian Kurdish Sunni scholar and reformer. In his teachings, mainly private classes, he argued that Quran itself is enough for source of interpretation and extreme scrutiny is required against Hadith which contract verses in the Quran. He established Quran Academy in the town of Parvez in Iran. Rashad Khalifa, an Egyptian-American biochemist and Islamic reformer. In his book Quran, Hadith and Islam and his English translation of the Quran, Khalifa argued that the Quran alone is the sole source of Islamic belief and practice. He further declared that the Hadith and Sunnah were satanic inventions under Satan's schemes. In the face of widespread anger and hostility by the Muslim world, Khalifa was stabbed to death on January 31, 1990 by Glenn Cusford Francis, a member of the terrorist organization Jamaat al-Fuqra.